things start to go badly, American officials, Robert Gates said it relatively recently, say, let's put an Afghan mask, an Afghan face on the war. And this is just a commonplace thing. And it means, let's get an Afghan out front. But if you think about that phrase for a minute, an Afghan face is, of course, a mask over really an American war. And often the words that they use, the images that they use, are very telling, if you just look barely under them, about what they think about who's actually running what war. I mean, you can really see in our language that we feel this is ours, it should be ours, you know, it's our war. I mean, this has, the Afghans are ancillary to the war we're fighting.
How do you propose pulling out? How do you propose Obama get out?
Well, let me say as a start that one of the problems with answering a question like this is, you know, basically, we've never tried it. I mean, in other words, it's like talking about peace. All the money goes into war. So you know, and in addition, as you try to get out, as was true in Vietnam for years, future fantasies are put forward. You know, there's going to be a bloodbath, terrible things will happen. We don't know what actually will happen in Afghanistan. If we were to pull out, we know what's happening now, and it's quite terrible, and it's actually devolving. I mean, I think it's perfectly reasonable whether you, I mean, you could simply announce a withdrawal, a reasonable withdrawal schedule, and pull out American troops. You could offer money. We really don't know. I think it's very unlikely, for instance, that the Taliban would simply take over the country. They didn't the last time. They might get part of the country, but not all of it. We really don't know what would happen. We just know that this will otherwise be a trillion-dollar war, which, like the Soviet war, will go on forever and ever. I mean, the Soviets, from about 1986 on, for about the last 3 or 4 years, they wanted to get out. The Soviet leadership, you look at their documents, they want to get out, but they can't muster the will. They keep worrying, will Afghanistan be stable, et cetera, et cetera. It goes on for years. And the problem isn't how will we get out of Afghanistan, but when Obama decides he wants to, it's going to be difficult.
And this most recent announcement about the vast mineral wealth in Afghanistan, especially coming, the timing of it, as the war is actually not progressing as well as the Obama administration had hoped. Is it your sense that this was more sort of rallying the corporate and financial elites of the world to take more renewed interest in supporting the U.S. effort? I'm
not convinced it's going to have that effect, actually. First of all, as you can see from the Times today, the Times had a piece on it today, and as was true with Iraq, it's very hard to get these big Western mining companies to come into a situation where, you know, the lithium that they're talking about is basically under lands that basically are Taliban controlled right now. They don't want to send their people in there. The people who might come in are the Chinese, maybe, who would be willing to take more risks, or various state mining interests that we wouldn't be interested in. So I'm not sure this is a great benefit in that sense. Secondly, you know, to get in a country with almost no infrastructure and no mining infrastructure, to get anything out of the ground there, I mean, I'm sure you're talking you're not talking about now. You're not talking about something striking that's going to happen now. I think, yeah, I mean, it was a kind of a good news story at a bad news time, and it is significant that there's all this stuff under Afghanistan which was known.
It's not as if it wasn't known, and no. The question is why it's being raised as a story now, if not to justify the U.S.'s continued presence, that maybe the U.S. can get these natural resources.
Let's point out that it was known by the Russians. You know, in the Russian war, the Russians knew this. I mean, I'm struck by one small thing. Mikhail Gorbachev, the Russian leader who did finally get them out, his term for Afghanistan was the bleeding wound. Our Afghan war commander recently referred to his kind of pet offensive in the small southern area of Marja, where they threw in 15,000 troops in the spring, declared it a victory, and now find out that things are not going well. He's called it a bleeding ulcer. There is kind of an eerie parallel there, and it reminds us that both countries will now have been in a war in Afghanistan, a place known as the graveyard of empires, for a decade.
You talk about finally garrisoning of the planet.
Yes. Well, The American Way of War, which is the title of my book, is based on something that in the United States we have basically no interest in. Unless a base closes in the United States, and then there's an enormous uproar, a military base, we really don't think much about our basing policy around the world. And yet,
10 seconds, then we go to a web special after.
And yet we have maybe up to 1,200 bases, depending on what you're counting, maybe even more, around the world. We basically garrison the planet. Washington is a war capital. We are in a state of war. We don't know it.
Tom Engelhardt, congratulations on your new book, The American Way of War, How Bush's Wars Become Obama's. We're going to continue this after the show and put it up at democracynow.org. That does it for our broadcast. We want to wish a very fond farewell to Democracy Now!'s chief engineer, Peter Curries. For the past 2.5 years, he's seen us through thick and thin in our daily broadcast and helped us build and transition to our new studio. Peter, thank you for everything. We will miss you here. Good luck as your new broadcast engineer at CUNY with all that you do. And of course, it means we now have a new job opening for Chief Broadcast Engineer. You can go to our website at democracynow.org for details. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Thanks for joining us.